with IBM for 10 years. The first half of my career was as a client-facing consultant in our GBS business, our Global Business Services. And the second half of my career has been with the integrated supply chain, where I'm in the Smarter Supply Chain Analytics team. We establish the strategy and tooling for our own supply chain analytics and visibility solutions. And then we also team with our GBS counterparts to bring these solutions out to the broader marketplace.
Well, great. Well, so good to have you today, Joe. I know IBM's been doing a lot of work around new forms of predictive analytics and cognitive computing, and, you know, it's great that you have at IBM kind of a test lab, and the fact that you manufacture things, and then you also have the analytics capabilities and the ability to do things with clients. Now, Glenn, I know you're subbing today for Ann Robinson that unfortunately couldn't make it, and I know that you have many years of experience with Informs, and you come from Procter & Gamble, and now you're doing some work on your own with analytical impact. Can you give the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first off, can you hear me?
I can now. Thank you so much. Good to hear your voice.
Great. I was called in earlier and heard you, but I don't know, there was some audio problem, but regardless. Well, first, thanks for inviting me to participate in this call. I am not anywhere near as good looking as Ann Robinson, so I'm going to be a poor substitute from that standpoint. But as you said, my background is I spent 28 years at Procter & Gamble. It was all in the space of analytical work, beginning in manufacturing plants, then working in logistics and distribution, and then expanding on out into looking at inventory problems, and straight on through to solving problems to our customers, right to their store shelf. I worked for a number of years with Jake Barr, as you know. I know you know him very well, and we worked on developing analysis approaches to helping strategize for the supply chain, and that became a hallmark of the work that we did. And I retired 2 years ago, and as you said, I'm now out doing a freelance consulting with companies on helping them build both their analytics shop as well as helping them solve some of their trickier supply chain problems.
Well, thank you for joining. And Glenn and Joe, what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the research, and as we go through it, I'm going to ask you your opinion. Because as I talk to supply chain leaders, you know, this concept of big data seems pretty airy and, you know, not really tangible for people. And they're struggling for how do they get up to speed on this new way of thinking about data, the new analytics, how do they get funding. And so I'm going to ask you to share your experiences. And then additionally, Joe, you've got some slides to talk about how you do it at IBM, because I think IBM's a wonderful case study of how we can actually bring big data concepts to life. So let's go through it. So Joe, tell us a little bit about the work at IBM. Joe, are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute to take care of background noise. Laura,
Yeah.
We're looking at the U.S. Open slide?
We are looking at the U.S. Open slide. So let's talk about a game of tennis, shall we?
Yeah, okay, good. I wanted to start with something that was maybe, like you said, not exactly spreadsheets and traditional supply chain speak. Last year, IBM had the opportunity to work with the U.S. Open tennis organization to deliver against a challenge, which was, you know, that we were asked, can we efficiently enable compelling user experiences during and after the U.S. tennis event? And our answer was obviously, yes, we can. So we did things that I want to just highlight really quickly because they're analogous to the way we can operate within supply chain. So with that broad challenge on the table, what we did was we went into really a advanced analytics kind of mode, if you will. We built predictive viewership models. We mined social networks to enable real-time demand analysis. This is really in the category of predictive analytics and big data. We provisioned a network in real time during the event This is an example of a cloud deployment model, which we're all reading a lot about and hearing a lot about, so that, in other words, as the crowd surged to do certain things, interacting with this application to stream video or to look at statistics, we would open up the right amount of bandwidth just as the need was happening. So this is a way to obviously gain efficiencies. And, you know, the magic of a cloud deployment model is that it's truly on demand just when you need it. And when people stop hitting the website or the service, then your piece of cloud shrinks back down and then it expands again. We developed mobile apps that would provide fast and fun insight to people who were hitting the site, hitting the statistics. This happened during the event and also afterwards. And we also, in the realm of prescriptive analytics, we put functionality in there where we could analyze metrics of players. We can determine which behaviors will win matches, whether it's shots at net, is it successfully returning a first serve, is it the duration, number of volleys, et cetera. Yeah. So the thing about this is good players would do this naturally, but if you take a good player and you arm them with these kinds of skills, then it's even better. They perform even better. So Laura, go down to the next slide, and I'm going to make the connection into supply chain, please. There we go.
Okay, great.
So, right. So why did I start with tennis? Well, because it's kind of a fun example, but it also is very instructive in terms of the big data and the analytics techniques that we use to open up this U.S. Open event to really make it a fun and useful experience. A lot of those same techniques we're going to use, and we are using, and we should all be using in our supply chain. We use those techniques. If you look to the bottom of this chart, we have a very large supply chain organization, which also includes the collection of cash. So we're running at about $99 billion of revenue at IBM. We apply analytics to that. We consider that to be part of the supply chain. We have a giant managed spend of more than $50 billion. We're on tap for huge savings in the procurement area every year, and we interact with very large numbers of our own employees and also our business partners. So we have, like Laura, like you said, a really amazing laboratory to work with. And luckily, the size and scale of IBM, we can, although it's hard, we can still find funding to put together proof of concepts and to roll out new features and functions across our supply chain. So let's go to the next page. Oh, yeah, go on.
Now, Joe, ISC stands for what within IBM?
Okay, Integrated Supply Chain. That is our organization, which includes about 20,000 people in all of the geographies that does the supply chain activities for IBM.
You know, and Joe, a lot of times people think about IBM and they think about you only as consulting or only as hardware, but this is really a supply chain group within IBM, right?
We are absolute practitioners of supply chain. We are, you know, dirt under our fingernails, proverbially speaking, supply chain people who are on task to deliver product, meet customer delivery dates, keep costs under control, procure at the lowest cost, not have stock out of products, all the normal supply chain functions. And
okay.
we do partner with our consulting folks to bring our skills out to their world, and we also take those consultants and bring them onto our problems. So it's a nice two-way street. So this next chart that we're looking at here really summarizes the essential point of view around big data and analytics. So we believe that the power play really is big data, which on this complicated chart is below the arrow on the right. So we add big data with advanced analytics, which are those four-stage maturity model steps in the middle, and then we embed that onto business processes. And these are business processes that are relevant to us as a company, but also that stretch across upstream to our suppliers and downstream to our business partners. So it's really a combination of the big data, which obviously is there are many things that make big data big. Those 4 boxes on the bottom right of the chart. There's the fact that data streams, which I showed you a brief example of in the tennis match example. There's variety. That's also relevant to tennis match. There's data from people's tweets, from their what pieces of the network they're hitting. So these are all things that we were mining in real time to predict the needs for the overall network. There's volume. There's a huge amount of volume. We actually took in 8 years of player match data and put that into an analytical reservoir, if you will, data lake, whatever the current terminology is, and that's all available for analysis. And there's veracity, which is where basically there's a lot of noise in data, especially when you're talking about social data and trying to intuit what these tweets and other things are actually, what they actually mean. So that's all the big data. Then what we do is we take a portfolio approach using these 4 pieces, descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, and cognitive, and we apply those capabilities against that big data stream and mound. And then we take all of that and we embed it into real use cases, automated business process flows that basically make it easy for people within our supply chain to access the benefit of analytics.
So, Joe, when you say we, is this an IT group? Is this a business group? Can you tell us a little bit about how you're organized?
Sure. The we is really the integrated supply chain. That is a group of supply chain practitioners. We do sit next to our IBM IT organization. We're not in the IT organization. We have our own general manager, Fran O'Sullivan, who is our chief supply chain officer. We interact a lot with the IT and the transformation folks at IBM, but we have our own capability. We have our own centers of competence. When we come up with a use case, we look at whether or not we should make or buy a solution. So we always look around, can we do this easily with some existing tools? Can we go over to our software group and pull some tools from there, or do we need to work with some third party? Or if there's literally nothing there that will help us to solve our business challenge, we'll go over to IBM Research and we'll invent something. So we have a nice kind of collaboration internally across these various towers of IBM.
Got it.
All right, we can go on. Or is there, yeah? Did you want to pose a question?
So now we're into social listening.
Right. Yes, I wanted to, the topic, Laura, that you had asked us to really focus on was big data. Mm-hmm. And social listening and big data are kind of synonymous terms in a sense. And I wanted to show you one of our capabilities that we use. Right now we're using this in our own supply chain, and how we're using social listening as an input into what we think of as a supplier risk management capability. So we have tools that go crawling around the web and doing text analytics. We point them in certain directions and with certain phrases, and we interact with these. There's a team of people that are interacting with these tools, providing sort of a broad net which brings in a lot of information. That information from social listening pairs with some dedicated analysts that we have looking at certain commodity markets. Again, this is the focus of this is procurement. So we care whether or not we're going to be able to find power supplies to embed into our computers, or the right computer chips, or the right board assemblies, et cetera, all of our major commodities. So we have teams of analysts that study those markets, and we pair them with the social listening. We input all that information into a large database, which is the blue block at the bottom left. We then distill that into a certain risk, which might be a risk for a supplier or a hub, or it could be a country risk, or it could be a commodity risk. So we have thousands of risks. These are the entities that we're monitoring through these means where the arrows are coming down from the left side of the page. When certain conditions change with respect to these risks, the information is in the database, and we run a rules engine on that to look for state changes when we think that a risk has gone from green, which is that it's not a risk, to yellow, which is that we're somewhat worried, to red, which is where we need to take some action. So we have this rules engine that produces the alerts, and those alerts go off to the right top of this chart, off to the relevant commodity council. So again, is it power supplies? Is it plastic housings? Is it whatever it is, it goes to the right commodity council. We also generate information that goes into a history log. And then at the end of a quarter and at the end of a period, we'll go and mine the history log, and we'll look at what conditions actually led to a risk turning red. So we can do predictive indicator analysis so that then we know on our next iteration of risk analysis and social listening, we should be paying particular attention to certain input variables. So that's the way it all comes back around in this picture.
So Joe, to your earlier model, would you call this prescriptive or predictive or cognitive? Where would you put this?
Well, this ticks off three of those pieces. It's descriptive in the sense that we're getting a lot of information in a very easy to access, visible place. It's predictive because we're beginning to predict where risks are based on fault pattern analysis of input variables. And it's prescriptive because we're going out and telling a certain commodity council manager, you know, you're managing this commodity and you have a problem that you might not have known about, so take some action on it. So it's really those first three. It's not yet cognitive, I would say.
And how long have you been mining the social data?
The social listening piece has been really just happening for the last year or so. That's a new piece to this puzzle. Before that, we were relying on those other two arrows, which were our in-house and third-party analysts who are going around looking at all kinds of inputs, but they weren't really armed with good social listening tools. That last part is new, about a year old or so.
And have you had a lot of insights from that kind of additional work?
Well, we have had, you know, it's more input that's coming into the engine. It is allowing us to identify even more levers to look at, because again, once we go through the end of this whole process and we look at the predictive indicator analysis, some of those indicators are in that social listening funnel up there. So we know that certain of those inputs are more important than others, so we're going to watch those even more closely. So I would say that it has provided a nice benefit for us, even in the first year.
Great.
Yeah. So another example I'll share with you all, and you, Laura, is this example from the automotive industry. This is where we've taken some of our predictive analytics and a big data approach and are using it with an external client who's a major global auto OEM. The way to look at this chart, which is a bit complicated, the x-axis is time, obviously. Those are years in there. And there's two different y-axes. On the left is the number of vehicles sold in this particular platform for this OEM. So these are cars that are being sold. And on the right y-axis is the cumulative number of warranty claims. So we had a hypothesis that by using predictive analytics, we could best our clients' ability to find these problems with their cars. And so we took their data, we took a historical stream of their data, and we ran it through our engine. And what we found is that while the client determined there was a problem in May of 2010, which is the big giant red line in the middle, client system alert, when we took that same data and put it through our advanced predictive analytic engine, we found the problem in February of 2007. And what's particularly important about this is that when the advanced analytics found the problem, 30,000 vehicles had been shipped. When the client's alert system found the problem, 200,000 vehicles had been shipped. So that's and 39 months had elapsed. So that was 39 months where this client was not able to be resolving the issue, changing the design, working with their supplier to make sure whatever the problem was worked out, et cetera, So big value. And
yeah, particularly for the automotive industry, where it seems like we're having a recall almost every day.
Oh, I know. It's been that way for about 6 months, as I recall. So one of the things. Okay, good. We'll move to this one. The semiconductor industry is also a really fabulously complex industry, and one where big data is relevant. And unless you apply analytical techniques to your big data, advanced analytics and visibility and transformation techniques, you'll be totally swamped by it. So we have several initiatives within our semiconductor manufacturing operations here within IBM, and we're also working on some of these concepts with outside companies. The first one, where it says 150% ROI expected, is where we are looking in the same way that I described with that risk management. We're looking at fault pattern recognition analysis. We're looking at parametric data that come off of these machines that are etching and depositing several atom-thick layers of various chemicals, and then they're buffing them, and then they're adding another layer in the photolithography machine, et cetera, super complex, so many variables. And what we're doing is we're using advanced fault pattern recognition techniques to help keep the machines calibrated correctly and avoiding scrap, because the other problem with semiconductor manufacturing is, if any of you have ever walked around in a fab, or maybe some of you are from microelectronics companies, the wafer travels around in the fab for the very complicated chips. It can be up to 50 days. So if you have a problem on day 49, you have ruined a lot of value in that on that wafer, because that wafer might be cut up into 300 or 400 individual chips, which sell for good money each one. So the stakes are very high in semiconductor manufacturing, and fault pattern recognition is a huge value for these guys. The other one on the bottom of this page, one of our other plants up in Burlington, Vermont, we've been moving this from 45 nanometer all the way down to sub-22 nanometer, which is pushing the envelope on the miniaturization of the circuitry. And it means that there's just a lot more quality data that's generated, and what we've done is we've used some new techniques to do some in-stream analysis of this data, as opposed to pulling the data aside and putting it into a data repository, hitting the repository for answers while the line keeps going. That's sort of the slow way to do it. The fast way is to take the data as it's streaming off of the machines and apply your analytics at that point, and that really helps. That's got a very large value proposition.
These are great examples of, the possibilities. Oh my gosh, what do you think, Joe?
Well, I love tennis, okay? So there's my tennis ball. But I did try to put a few examples in, Laura and team, from where analytics can help you access big data, and I try to make the point that if you don't use analytics and visibility, big data will crush you, because like that Burlington semiconductor example, the data is there. The data is streaming at us. We have these machines. They produce an ungodly amount of data. One thing that produces a similarly huge amount of data is the jet engine. As it's flying from Boston, where I live, over to Europe, every hour there's a giant stream of data that is flowing off of that engine, measuring everything you can imagine. So there's the big data. The question is, what are you going to do with it? So the possibilities are endless. And if you go one more down, there you go. Oops, back one.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay, all right.
my tagline. Data can show you how to win no matter what industry you're in. So I started with tennis. So Serena Williams doesn't really need to do a lot of data analysis. She's going to win anyway. But the people under her should be looking at some for help wherever they can get it. We in supply chain should also be leveraging this data and these new analytical tools.
Well, Glenn, I'm going to bring you in now because, you know, not everybody's sitting within IBM, which is sort of like a lab, right, where they've got analytics thinkers, they've got funding, they've got people and business thinking about this. You know, what do you think are the barriers for the average Joe in a process-based company, or, you know, maybe it's chemical, maybe it's CPG, maybe it's retail? What do you think the barriers are? Are you there, Glenn? Glenn, you may be on mute.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Laura, can you hear me?
I can now.
Laura?
Thank you. Yes, I can now.
You can hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on. I keep dropping out.
Sorry.
But first off, I just wanted to say, Joe, those are really excellent examples of the use of big data and leveraging it and really delivering some very significant results. And as Laura said, I think not everyone is an IBM, and even at P&G, we had a number of different barriers that and challenges on really developing analytical capability and developing it and delivering it as well. I guess to answer your question, if I can kind of kick off my end of how do you really start this and leverage it. I do apologize, I don't have any slides to go along with this, but let me start off here with how do you get this stuff started. I think you know, it comes down to, is your organization ready? Do you have a leadership that is willing to invest not only the time but also the resources and obviously the investment cash to start leveraging and building this capability? And I think of it as there are a number of different places that you can find a sweet spot for this. But when we started up the analytic capability at P&G, and I recently just spoke about this, that analytics at P&G goes back 50 years. It surprised me as well, too. It started off with a very specific management need, and there was a very large internal project that was, you could say, was big data driven. It was a very large problem in terms of having far too much capacity, not enough understanding of how markets were changing, and understanding whether there needed to be some consolidation opportunities that took place. We happen to have found a champion within the leadership for that particular project that really wanted to drive better insights and a better decision-making process to ensure that some very large capital investments that the company was planning on making really was being driven by intelligent analysis. And we happen to have the right kind of capabilities to be able to bring to bear on that specific problem. Because we did it well and we did it with a certain level of success, we were able to build off of that and build a program. And while I mentioned it started 50 years ago, I wasn't quite around at P&G 50 years ago, but this project began what we did in analytics about 20 years ago. Now, that's one way to get started, is you have a very large corporate level focus that and in a champion for analytics that wants to invest the time and the resource to improve a decision-making process. The other is starting small and starting with a focused area. But what we have found time and time again is it always begins with someone who wants to champion the process and wants to champion to have analytics in their shop as helping to guide them and drive better insights and better decision making. Because at the end of the day, analytics is about a better decision and making that decision and then putting it in the right context of whether it's for guiding better strategy longer term, or is it for turnkey, immediate decision-making that takes place at a point of sale or at an operator station in a manufacturing site or in a warehousing area. It really just depends on how you want to leverage that data effectively.
So Glenn, now, this analytics group, that was a business group, right? Not an IT group at P&G?
It was a combination. It was a combination of both. But we were part of the IT function, but we were allowed to operate for many years quite independently of the IT shop. And it worked out pretty effectively for us because we were able to work as objective counsel to the businesses themselves. And then when it required us to have access to data, we were able to do it because we were within the group and we had access to the resources that allowed us to tap into the data capabilities.
Well, I think those are great stories. I mean, P&G and IBM are esteemed names when it comes to data. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some research slides. I'm going to ask you guys to give your thoughts because as I talk to the average Joe and the average manufacturing or retail company, I find three barriers. One, people just trying to get up the speed on the terminology and, you know, how do they think about things like social data or unstructured data or even some of the models, Joe, that you were using. So the first is education. The second is organization. Who in the organization drives this? You know, because the IT group is very encumbered with, you know, budget constraints around, you know, ERP upgrades and maintenance. And third, where does this technology come from? Because what I'm finding is it's not coming from large vendors. It tends to come from best-of-breed providers. And, you know, it tends to be small projects and test and learn. And so the third question is, how do they go about it? So let me go through some research, and then I'm going to stop and ask your opinion to share with the audience. And again, if people have a question, put it in the Q&A box. You know, this is an example of a rules-based ontology and cognitive learning. This is a company that has actually abstracted a supply chain, and you can see here are the nodes, and the rules-based ontology is actually sitting underneath cognitive learning. And if you think about the traditional supply chain technologies, we had singular ifs to singular thens. So we built these really hard and fast rules for the supply chain, whether it was in master data management or whether it was in available to promise or whether it was in warehouse management. We built hard if-thens, assuming that supply chains would play by the rules, but they really don't. And so one of the things that we have an opportunity now is moving into cognitive learning, as Joe was talking about. And, you know, the data is in clouds, right? So we've got a lot of data that has been built into cloud-based technology. We actually see from the research that more and more companies are moving data into clouds in all forms of application. I've actually seen acceptance of cloud-based technology increase by about 50% by people in supply chain. We also have data in streams. Joe, you talked about the streaming data from airplanes or the streaming data that we get from Internet of Things. And we have data in lakes. So point-of-sale data, for example, will come into lakes. So we've got data in clouds, we've got data in streams, we've got data in lakes. But, you know, this isn't the traditional rows and columns relational database kind of discussion that we had with ERP and data warehousing 10 years ago. You know, instead, you know, we've got this evolution of from structured to unstructured to sensor data to new data types. And, you know, people say the term big data, and Joe, you use a different model, but it's about volume, velocity, and variability. And I don't find that we have so much a big data problem in volume, but a big data opportunity with being able to mine the data in streams, to mine the data in lakes, and to be able to reduce variability, Joe, like your example on your semiconductor industry. And in the research, we find that, you know, big data is one of the top 3 supply chain trends. And people consider it an opportunity, not a problem, but they don't know how to go about it. 65% have a big data initiative, but, you know, they're struggling with how to really get that off the ground. And it's, you know, a small project and an iterative project, and it's, you know, take pieces of data and learn from it. And, you know, it has to be really driven by line of business. So, Joe, any thoughts about, you know, how would people get started, people listening on the phone that don't happen to be working with the wonderful resources at IBM, how do they get started? How do they learn the language? How do they think about these architectures differently? How do they start to really build this kind of core competency? Any advice?
Sure, Laura. I would say one of the key things that has to happen is to drive a successful analytics project, looking back over the years at what IBM has done, you really need a very strong line of business starting point. There has to be a burning platform, some problem that a business person is feeling and suffering from. If you start there, and then you look at, now how can we resolve that issue? And then you look at, well, there's a lot of big data over here in the cloud or in the stream or in that lake that we're not tapping into to fix this problem. So I really believe that it should be driven principally by a business need, and then 2 other key parties to bring to the table right away would be your analytics center of competency type skill sets, whether that's within your company or whether you partner with somebody on the outside to bring that in. And then the third leg of the stool would be the IT and the transformation piece, because anything that we do exists in the broader context of the enterprise architecture of whatever business you're in. So it's a 3-legged stool with business, analytics SMEs, and some sort of business transformation and IT people. And then I want to say one more thing that reiterate, Glenn, what you said on starting small. Though we have a giant portfolio of analytics now at IBM operating and producing really interesting results and a lot of ROI for us, every one of these things started as an initiative, as a small sort of a data demonstration, which then expanded to a pilot. And the pilot might have been for just 1 or 2 product lines, or maybe it was 1 plant, or it could have been 1 VAR in our case. So these things go out small. They sort of embrace a fast fail mode where let's go in and try something, and if we fail, then we're going to notice, change it up. And the cycles and iterations are really measured in weeks and months, not, you know, in quarters. So
well, here's the struggle.
Small projects, fast movement. Yep.
Yeah, but here's the struggle that I see, Glenn, with this. I totally agree with Joe's point, but I was talking to the CFO magazine the other day, and I was saying to be able to seize big data opportunities, we cannot hamstring business groups with a definitive ROI, that, you know, we need to free them to use technology for innovation. And often I'll have people say they want to start with a burning platform, they want to try some of these new forms of analytics, and then their next question is, what ROI can they get? And I'm like, we're testing and learning here. What advice do you have there, Glenn?
I do agree with Joe too that, you know, you have to find the focus, that burning platform. It really is. Analytics has to be driven by the business. It has to be driven by a very specific problem that needs to be tackled and addressed. You know, we talked, I think yesterday, Laura, about you know, big data. What exactly is it? I am less concerned about someone saying, gee, we have all this big data, what are we going to do with it, than I am, what exactly is the problem that needs to get solved to move the business forward? And then as you begin with leveraging the right decision-making process against that. You know, let me frame this up similar to how Joe talked about this, in that you know, we use the term assessing the landscape, and for me it always comes down to some very simple questions, and that is, what exactly is the question that needs to get answered, and is there leadership support and interest in moving forward and using an analytical framework to help drive better decision making? Who exactly is asking the question? Is this a marketing-driven type of question where external sensing data, mouse clicks, social data can help drive and improve the quality of the decision? Or is it something that is purely sensor-driven? And again, Joe had some nice examples there where internally, are you sensor-driven, and are you capturing that data, and is that part of the big data platform that you're building and leveraging against?
Yep.
One of my colleagues at P&G, who was in charge of the engineering and R&D analytics at P&G, started the process 5 years ago where every sensor, if it was possible to capture, archive that data, he did it. And because you don't know in the future when you've got the right problem and the right question formed and how you're going to address it. The deeper your database for sensor data and the longer it is, the better predictive capability you're going to be able to derive from that. And so, you know, cheaply storing sensor data and archiving it and just knowing that it's there to access, you don't know when you're going to need it, but it's cheap to store it, and it is a piece of gold if you have it, and how you can leverage it with the right analytics.
Yeah, you know, last week I was at a conference called PivotCon, and it was about, you know, the evolution and the future of digital and digital business. And I was sitting in the back of the room, and people were postulating that we were moving to digital manufacturing, and traditional manufacturing would go away. And I thought about, you know, how naive that was, because we have so much process manufacturing that will never become digital, but yet we have so much sensor data and streaming data that could help us in the redefinition of quality and the redefinition of manufacturing, like Joe says. But let's take a look at where people are at today. You know, 76% say they've got a big data opportunity, but they're really trying to drive that out of the IT organization, which I think is a mistake. And, you know, 28% have a big data initiative now, Glenn, like you're saying, and 65% would like to have one, but they're really struggling on where to go. And, you know, when we look at the supply chain, cross-functional alignment is the top barrier, you know, in terms of how do I get out of the function and raise the discussion on analytics to a higher level, but people are really struggling with higher demand and supply volatility, demand visibility, and the data that we've built in our traditional systems, the data checks in, but the data doesn't check out. So people's ability to use data has been a challenge. And so when we ask people where they're starting today in these projects, it's with data visualization, things like Tableau and Spotfire and mapping with Esri. It's about demand sensing or demand translation or increased visibility into the supply chain and supply sensing. You know, what do you think of this list, Glenn? Is this similar to the list that you see with your clients? Are you there, Glenn? Yep.
Yes, I am. I'm slow to respond. You know, the idea of visualization is really not a bad place to start. One of the areas that we were exploring at P&G before I left 2 years ago was the idea of taking what we had as being a surprisingly good level of quality data on P&G's inventory. Now, to size that up, we were talking about 400 stocking locations around the world, each one holding 1,000 to 2,000 SKUs, and we had invested enough sufficiently to have the master data and the actual day-by-day tracking of inventory positions, such that we were able to each day know exactly what, on a SKU and location basis, each one of our inventory levels were. That was really good IT level work, but it was not being leveraged as broadly as it could have been. Now, when I mentioned earlier about finding that really big problem that the company wants to try to solve, we identified that P&G was in a little bit of a cash flow problem a few years ago, and we were looking for opportunities to free up cash. Well, what better way to free up cash than reducing your inventory? And what we did was we leveraged high degree of visibility of that very, very high quality data that we had on inventory positions, and then developed a methodology to share that in a very visible manner with our top management on identifying where our inventory positions were, how they were changing over time, and connecting that with out-of-stock data, and as well as whether we were matched up appropriately with what our production plans were for that data. And that became something that we leveraged for each of our management teams across the company, and then drove, let's just say it was several $100 million of savings.
Yeah, well, Procter & Gamble reduced 10 days of inventory, right, against peer group. I mean, it was very significant.
Yeah.
You know, what technologies did you use there, Glenn?
For the visualization piece, we used a combination of Spotfire as the visualization platform, and then we leveraged something else that was getting cooked up in our IT organization, and that was a concept called a business sphere. And what it was a standard methodology to project these data pieces in the context of a normal conference room. And that the key differentiator here was we had an analyst that went along with the package. So we worked with business teams and met with them on a biweekly basis. And when I say we, each one of our analysts that were in our shop sat with the business teams and the planners and reviewed where they were with their inventory positions using a highly visualizing capability that allowed them to drive down, right down to the SKU level if necessary, but then aggregating on up to be able to understand the big picture. And
Great.
These became extremely interactive sessions that really helped drive these types of results that you mentioned.
Yeah. Now, Joe, we're running out of time here. So what do you think of this list? Any feedback for the audience about how to get started?
Sure. Well, first I'll say I love the list, Laura. I think data visualization really speaks to our needs as consumers of the data to gain meaning from a lot of data that looks like a pile of bits and bytes, but there actually is some value in there. So it makes it possible for us to interact with that, to understand whatever the pattern is that's hiding in all that data. So I think that's wonderful that data visualization is on the top of your heap. Demand sensing, I think, is another really, really wonderful area. What's good about it, in my mind, is that it faces towards your customer, which is where we should be putting the lion's share of our efforts anyway. And it has to do with streaming data, some point of sale data coming back in upstream into your supply chain, providing all kinds of opportunities to drive out cost and to drive up customer service. So demand sensing is super valuable, and I can't get I can't get any more excited about visibility into supply chain. I think the visibility goes within an organization. It goes from the very top to so your chief supply chain officer down to people working in the plants and people moving boxes around. But it also goes in the other vector all the way upstream to your component makers, so your suppliers, supplier, and then all the way down to your customers who are using your product, doing whatever they're doing with it, whether it's a P&G product or an IBM product.
Great.
So, yeah, those are great. I'd say, again, to get started, look for a business problem, figure out how to construct a quick win and gain an ally, and look for allies in the IT organization, look for allies in your corporate organization. Right now, everybody is concerned with and interested in making the most out of big data and advanced analytics, so they'll be eager to hear your pitch. So put a pitch together, make a quick sort of articulate a pathway where you can do a few quick iterations and pick off some low-hanging fruit, and then your project will grow from a single instance to multiple instances, and before the end of the year or the end of the next year, now it's a platform play. It's big.
Right. Well, Matthew is asking us a question here, Glenn, about master data management and the tie to unstructured social data. So from my research, I'm going to answer the question. The question is, how does a master data management strategy tie into unstructured social data? And from the work I'm doing with clients, the use of cognitive value reasoning allows people to actually go and get data where it exists versus pulling data. And I see early adopters adapting technologies on cognitive reasoning for the mapping of master data, much like what we're doing on the mapping of unstructured data. Glenn, any thoughts there?
Honestly, Laura, that is not an area that I have a high degree of expertise in.
Okay.
Master data is not my gig.
Joe, your thoughts?
But
yeah, I would say your nod to cognitive models is the right way to go on that, because once that large volume streaming social data enters the picture, you need some new tools. Otherwise, you're going to get buried right up to your neck and beyond very quickly.
New tools and new ways of thinking. Well, we're going to have to close here. From the research and from what you've said, I'm just going to try to summarize, and then Joe and Glenn, I'm going to ask if you have anything to add. When we think about big data, I think we've got a new opportunity. It's about streams, it's about lakes, it's about the ability to use data in new ways, whether it's structured or unstructured data. But it's really got to start with a burning platform and a business problem, and it's got to start from the line of business, and I think the opportunity here is to start small, test and learn, and to really really be able to drive unique value. However, I think people have to retool. They've got to think about new problems. They've got to embrace new forms of data. They've got to learn a new language, and they've got to build business teams. Joe, anything else you would add?
Yeah, I would add that big data is happening. You know, all the examples we've come up with in this hour call have been evidence that it's streaming at us. So the question is, do you have the analytical models and tools to handle that, to make some sense of it? And can you bake your big data and your analytical models into a digitally executed business process? And if you can do that, that's the power play that I think we're all looking for.
Yeah, but Joe, I don't think anybody's ready for that. I think that's a future state. What do you think, Glenn?
Well, I think it is not about the tools. It is about the talent, and it's about the capability. Because I completely agree that you have to have the right business proposition and the right business case for it. But who's going to do the analysis? Who? Where is that coming from? It's not going to be delivered by a tool. It's going to be delivered by someone who has the skill set. And to really dig into that piece of it yet, but just very, very briefly, if you don't have it internally and you can't develop it internally, then I can think of at least 3 places where it can come from. One is there are a lot of business schools that are picking up and building their business analytics programs, and they are very hungry to find companies as partners to help them leverage the skill set that they're developing, and they're great areas to tap into. I'd highly encourage you to explore those. The second is, as you'd mentioned before, there are small boutique custom house consulting firms that be very effective at helping to learn and understand what is the type of skill set that you need to have internally to be able to understand, are you solving the right problems or not for your company? And the third area is there are a lot of good vendors that are out there that have good models on knowing what kind of skill you need to have internally, and then when can you turn externally to bring in the right kind of tools and the right kind of capabilities.
Well, Glenn, I think the concept of talent is, woefully missing in my wrap-up, and I thank you for that. We see that, the average time to just get a demand and supply planner right now is 5 months. And at our conference in September, Manny from Intel was talking about the partnerships he was doing with his analytics team in Intel with major universities and how he was offering jobs to people with analytics skills 2 years before they, really get their degree. And so, the talent pool is a, challenge, and really building talent, I think, is really the nexus of what we need to do. Thank you, guys.
Let me go on record as well for saying talent is key, and I should have put it in my wrap-up too, but without talent, all of this good stuff that we're talking about is just going to go either very, very slowly or nowhere.
Great. And we'll share the contacts of you, and I'd love to continue the dialogue, but right now we've got to wrap up. Thank you, Glenn and Joe, so much for joining us today. Our next webinar will be in November on the Race for Supply Chain 2020, and in this we'll be talking about streaming data and the Internet of Things and a couple of case studies of how people have used sensors, because the supply chain of tomorrow is not like the supply chain of today. Thank you very much, Glenn and Joe. I appreciate your time. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye now.